Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. Get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line of 1-800-472-0391. Getting updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Taking a look now at the watches that we do have out. Two freeze watches. One is in the Anchorage Bowl area and one is for the Matt Valley. And those are going to be in effect Thursday and Friday mornings. We are looking at Friday being the colder of the 2 days, but there's going to be potential for some of the low-lying areas, some of the areas that are more typically seeing the colder temperatures, such as East Anchorage, that could get down near that freezing mark as well Thursday morning. A lot of other areas around the Anchorage Bowl and Matt Valley are going to be in the mid-30s to lower 30s. And then on Friday morning, with those colder temperatures, we are expecting to have temperatures near freezing with as low as 25 Fahrenheit in some of the more typically colder areas, again, such as East Anchorage. Keep that in mind. Again, that is freeze watch for Thursday and Friday mornings for the Anchorage Bowl and Matanuska Valley. Also of note, we do have some snow coming into northern locations of the state, especially in the Brooks Range, where we are expecting the potential for some accumulations. There could be up to 4 to 6 inches of total accumulated snow above 3,000 feet through Thursday, and that's going to be in some of those passes through the Brooks Range. Could be on some of the road system moving through areas such as Adigan Pass. It should be a pretty slushy snow if we do get some on the ground, so be mindful of that. We might also have some snow fall along the North Slope areas. However, a lot of that won't last too long and should be pretty mild compared to what we'll see in the Brooks Range itself. So keep that in mind again, and we will see those snow levels falling as we move closer towards the Thursday time frame, as we are expecting some colder temperatures as we move into Thursday morning. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, we have one low that is out near southwest Alaska, bringing some cloud cover to the area and rain to some areas around there as well. If we look a little bit further to the south, we can see a boundary that's running up from the North Pacific towards Kodiak Island out through the North Gulf area. That's bringing some rain to those areas as well. Out over the central portions of the Bering Sea, we don't see a lot of the higher clouds, but we do see some of the low-lying stratus. That's because it's stuck underneath high-pressure ridging that we have out over the area. You can notice that with some of the darker colors for the cloud tops as opposed to the bright white that we see in some of the areas like further out west, where we have another system pushing in towards the western Aleutian Islands, bringing rain back to the area over there. Taking a look now at the weather for the remainder of today, we do have that frontal system pushing in towards the western Aleutian Islands, bringing rain to the area, with our high pressure out over the central and eastern Aleutians, with ridging extending up into the Bering. Our low out over the Norton Sound area, bringing rain throughout areas of southwest Alaska, much of south central Alaska as well, including much of the interior, and then up through the Brooks Range and along some of the Arctic coastline areas. We do have some fog along the Arctic coast, and that's going to extend down some of the west coast towards the St. Lawrence Island area as well as the YK Delta area. We also have some rain over much of the Gulf of Alaska, pushing in towards some areas near Kodiak, along the North Gulf Coast to the Yakutat area and into northern locations of the Panhandle. As we move into the tonight time frame, we are going to continue to see rain in the northern portions of the Panhandle with some more rain along the North Gulf Coast. And we're going to start to see some snow in some of the higher elevations, whether it be the Wrangell St. Elias area, some eastern locations of the Chugach Mountains, the Talkeetna Mountains, and the Alaska Range. However, that's going to stay in the higher elevations, and we don't expect any snow for these areas in the valleys or near the surface. However, as we move up towards the Brooks Range, that is again where we're going to see some of the snow in the Brooks Range through the passes and along some of the Arctic coastline as well, where we will also have some fog up along much of the Arctic coastline, down some of the west coast into the YK Delta area. We'll have some rain over the the western portions of the interior, down through the Norton Sound and into southwest Alaska. High pressure remaining over the eastern portions of the Aleutians and Bering Sea, holding off some of the rain from that system that's trying to move in from the west, so that we'll slow that track down. This front is expected to move pretty slow towards the east, pushing rain closer towards the central Aleutian Islands as we move through tonight. As we move into Wednesday, that slow-moving front going to continue to bring more rain to the western and central Aleutian Islands, pushing further to the east, but that high pressure so dominant in the eastern portions of the Bering Sea, holding that front, the progression of that front to the west. As we look out over mainland Alaska, our low is now over the northeastern portions of the area, over that eastern Brooks Range. We will have some areas of fog stretching up from the YK Delta up the west coast and along the Arctic coastline. As we get to the North Slope and Brooks Range, still going to see a mixture of rain and snow in those locations, with the potential for some of that accumulating snow in the Brooks Range, especially through the passes. As we look down into the interior, expecting some rain. That rain's going to extend down into south central Alaska as well, especially the eastern portions of south central Alaska and along the North Gulf Coast, where that will extend down through the Yakutat area into northern locations of the Panhandle. Then as we move into Thursday, some of that rain for southern locations starting to clear up a little bit, but we'll still have some lingering showers in central and northern locations of the Panhandle area, with that high pressure moving into southwest Alaska, keeping a lot of that precipitation further to the north, starting to get some clearing for south central and southwest Alaska under the effects of that high pressure. However, in the interior and areas further to the north, we're still expecting some rain, with still some areas of snow through the Brooks Range and through the passes there. As we get up along the Arctic coastline, a mixture of rain and fog is expected. It's going to extend all the way along the Arctic coastline down into areas of the Kotzebue Sound as well. Then with our frontal system pushing in from the west, making a little bit more progression as the high pushes off to the east, so too will this system move further into the east, bringing more rain to the central Aleutian Islands. And another system approaching from the south, you can see it there with that warm front coming in from or to the south of the Alaska Peninsula, not quite making it to any of our Alaska areas as of Thursday. As we look at our low temperatures on a Wednesday morning, starting off over the Aleutian Islands, temperatures dropping down into the mid-40s with 42 for St. Paul. As we look into the Bristol Bay area, temperatures dropping to the upper 30s to lower 40s, with 41 expected for Iliamna and Dillingham. Looking into the YK Delta area, temperatures dropping down into the upper 30s to lower 40s as well. And that's going to extend up some of the west coast with those upper 30s around the Seward Peninsula and 40 degrees for Kotzebue. As we get up along the Arctic coastline, temperatures dropping down to right around freezing in most locations. And as we look into the interior portions of the state, dropping down into the lower to mid 40s. Mid to upper 40s for much of south central Alaska, a little bit colder there for Glen Allen, dropping down to 42 degrees, and then 52 for Middleton Island. As we look down into the Panhandle area, temperatures dropping down to the lower to mid 50s, with 52 for Yakutat. As you look into Wednesday afternoon, temperatures jumping back up around 70 degrees for southern locations of the Panhandle, and then progressively getting cooler as we get further to the north in the Panhandle area, down to 61 at Juneau, and only getting up to 54 degrees for Yakutat. In south central area, mid to upper 50s are expected. In the interior locations, eastern portions down or up into the lower 50s, and mid 40s as we get to the western locations, back up around 50 degrees for southwest Alaska and mid 50s for the Bristol Bay area. Seward Peninsula getting up into the mid 40s, with Shishmaref and Nome getting up to 47 degrees as well as Kotzebue. Up along the Arctic coastline, temperatures getting up into the mid 30s for the most part, a little bit warmer out west, getting into the 40s there. Down in the Aleutian Islands area, right around 50 degrees is expected for most locations, and the Pribilofs getting up into the lower 50s. For our lows for Thursday morning, staying out in the Aleutian Islands area, mid 40s are expected. Down in the Bristol Bay area, mid 30s expected. And then for the YK Delta area, mid 30s to right around 40 degrees, and then those mid 30s are going to extend up into the interior all throughout the area until you get up to the Fort Yukon area, where it's going to stay a little bit warmer at 40 degrees. Lower 40s for the Seward Peninsula area, with Campbell dropping down to 44 degrees, and then along the Arctic coastline, still warmer out west, seeing temperatures in the upper 30s, whereas down around freezing for eastern locations, with Dead Horse getting down to 31 degrees. Down in the south central area, in the lower 40s for most places near the water, and then in the mid 30s for locations that are more interior. Down in the Panhandle area, temperatures dropping down to the lower to mid 50s, with temperatures a little bit warmer in the more southerly locations, with the exception of Skagway area, where we're going to see 54 degrees as well. And then 48 for Yakutat. High temperatures for Thursday afternoon, getting up into the mid to upper 60s in southern locations of the Panhandle, and then right around 60 degrees for northern locations. Kodiak going to get up to 59 degrees, with mid 50s for much of the south central area. In the mid 40s for eastern locations of the interior, getting up into the 50s as we get further to the west, and in southwest Alaska. Right around 40 degrees for the Arctic coastline, and right around 50 degrees for the Aleutian Islands, with 53 expected for St. Paul.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather for Wednesday morning. Way out west over the western Aleutian Islands, we have frontal system pushing in, bringing some IFR conditions to the area. Our low that's over the main part of the state, further up to the north, bringing some IFR conditions to the Brooks Range and areas along the Arctic coastline. Then MVFR conditions along much of the western part of the mainland, down through the Bristol Bay area into Kodiak Island area. Along the North Gulf Coast, we have a mixture of MVFR and IFR conditions, and then MVFR throughout the Panhandle. As we move into Wednesday afternoon, going to continue to see primarily MVFR in the Panhandle area. However, as we get closer towards the Coast Range in the southern portions of the Panhandle, we are going to see some VFR conditions. IFR out over the Gulf of Alaska, and then primarily VFR conditions for south central Alaska. As you move up into the interior, a lot of MVFR conditions, especially for central and western locations along much of the west coast as well. And up along the Arctic coast, I'm going to see some MVFR conditions. Out over the Bering, we're going to have the IFR conditions out further to the west as that front pushes further towards the east. And then we're going to have some MVFR conditions up in the northern portions of the Bering. As we move into Thursday morning, we're going to have IFR conditions through much of the central and western portions of the Bering and Aleutians, with some VFR conditions for the far eastern portions of the Bering, especially in the southern locations. As we look over mainland Alaska, quite a few areas are going to see some MVFR conditions, with the exception of the portions of the southern mainland, especially for south central and down by the Bristol Bay area. Then for the Panhandle area, we're going to see some MVFR conditions, primarily with some IFR conditions as we get closer towards the Gulf. Then in Thursday afternoon, things are going to clear up in the Panhandle, going to see VFR conditions. However, those IFR conditions are going to linger out over the Gulf waters with some MVFR conditions up for Yakutat. South Central should be VFR, and eastern areas of the interior also expected to be VFR, whereas central and western locations going to be MVFR out over much of the west coast from the YK Delta area to the north. Along the Arctic coastline, MVFR and IFR conditions are expected. Through the central and western portions of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we are looking at some IFR and MVFR conditions, with VFR conditions further to the east. Through the passes, starting up in the Brooks Range and Aktuvik, should be IFR throughout the day on Wednesday, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark will start off VFR, drop down to marginal, and Merrill will be marginal throughout the day Wednesday. Rainy Pass also expected to be MVFR throughout the day, as well as windy. Isabel will start off marginal and improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Mentasta will be VFR throughout the day, as well as at Tenita, and Portage will start off marginal and then improve to VFR in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White both expected to be marginal conditions throughout the day on Wednesday. For our freezing lines, we could see the surface freezing level moving in over the Arctic coastline, down much of the northwestern coast as well. We're going to have some warmer air as we look down over the Panhandle area. The 14,000 foot freezing level just to the south of the Panhandle area, and then some area of colder air extending down over much of the eastern portion of the Bering Sea, 4,000 feet down into the southern location south of the Pribilof Islands. As we look at our icing out over mainland Alaska and southwest, we're going to see between 4,000 feet, above 5,000 feet for much of the interior, and then as we get to the Arctic coastline, above 1,000 feet is expected. For our jet stream, the strongest portion of the jet out of a southwesterly direction moving through the North Gulf and southern part of the mainland at as high as 120 knots, exiting out as 110 knots. Out over the Panhandle area in the 70 to 80 knot range out of a southwest to west direction, 65 knots out of a westerly direction out over the northern portion of the Bering, and then at around 85 knots circling around our low pressure system out over the western portion of the Bering. Down to 9,000 feet, westerly winds over the western Aleutians around 50 knots, dropping down due to the high pressure that's out over the eastern Aleutian Islands. Then much of the state is going to see westerly directions through much of the interior, 35 knots out of that westerly direction, as well as through south central Alaska. Along the west coast, northwesterly winds 25 knots, and weaker winds up along the Arctic coastline. Down in the Panhandle area, west to northwest winds around 50 knots, dropping down as we get further south in the Panhandle down to around 20 knots. For 3,000 feet, quite a bit weaker for the Panhandle area. We're going to see winds around 30 knots coming in out of a westerly direction to northern locations, and then out of a northerly direction out of 30 knots, exiting out of the southern areas of the Panhandle. Out over the mainland part of the state, the main area of winds is going to be out over the central and western portions of the interior. Northwesterly winds 35 knots from the Kotzebue Sound area, becoming westerly 40 knots as we get into the central interior. And then 50 to 55 knots out of a west to southwest wind out over the western Aleutian Islands, pushing towards the central Aleutians. For our turbulence in the interior, we're expecting below 4,000 feet, and then for the western Aleutians, below 3,000 feet is expected.
Just as the sun is part of weather on Earth, it also affects weather in space. The sun creates solar wind by steadily releasing a flow of plasma particles in all directions around it. Sometimes the sun gives off a flash of light and X-rays. This is known as a solar flare. When massive bursts of particles explode into space, we call it a coronal mass ejection, or CME. When a CME is directed toward Earth, it hits the magnetosphere, the magnetic field around our planet that protects us. If the storm is large, we may even get to enjoy a light display in the sky called the auroras. In space, satellites may be damaged, and astronauts should take cover. On Earth, people do not feel any physical effects. We may lose electricity in some areas, polar flights may be rerouted, and satellite services may be disrupted. While these situations aren't ideal, they are rare and fixable. This is why we will continue to study the sun and its interactions with Earth and the solar system.
Longing for more space, open skies, and exotic travel? Then look up, about 30 to 600 miles straight up, at the ionosphere, Earth's interface to space. Nestled far above the clouds but below outer space, this little understood destination invites you to explore its many features. Experience both the weather from Earth and the weather from space. Marvel at the ballet of radio waves and navigation signals, like GPS, leaping through this particled paradise. Sit back, relax, and take in the aurora, some satellites, and the International Space Station as they sail by. And you'll want your camera handy for one of the region's signature features, bright and colorful air glow. This daily show is made possible by the ionosphere's own swirling charged particles, because that's what the ionosphere is. It's all charged particles. During the day, enjoy the sea of particles, freshly energized by the sun. As the sun sets, this particle party relaxes and the air glow thins. Our quieter nightlife lets you gaze into clearer skies. The ionosphere is in constant motion, an amazing effect of space weather. Don't miss when solar storms rain down. The storm separates the particles even more, making this colorful region delightfully more dense in some places and stunningly sparse in others. And don't forget about storms from Earth below. Your weather from back home also stirs up this one-of-a-kind destination. Experience the unique beauty of every season, as changes in Earth's atmosphere, daily and annually, can create pressure waves, changing the ionosphere's shape and density. Venture to the equator, where our particles are packed in lush and thick. Cruise along a magnetic field line and see how the ionosphere's charged material also interacts with Earth's own magnetic field. Don't miss the superhighway of particles zipping out to space and back down to the planet. This unpredictable parade of charged particles can help you unplug and unwind. This is because the crowd of particles can garble the radio and satellite communications from home. The ionosphere welcomes you to discover more about this little-known region. After all, once you've explored this interface to space, who knows how much farther you'll be able to go.
When a star, bigger and more massive than the Sun, runs out of fuel at the end of its life, its core collapses while the outer layers are blown off in a supernova explosion. What's left behind depends on the star's original mass. A star roughly 10 to 20 times our Sun leaves behind a neutron star. A more massive star becomes a black hole. Unlike black holes, neutron stars are directly observable, usually as pulsars, the lighthouses of the cosmos. Discovered 50 years ago, they are the densest observable objects in the universe. Neutron stars compress up to twice the sun's mass into a city-sized sphere. Matter is packed so tightly that a teaspoon of neutron star interior would weigh more than 1 billion tons on Earth. Still, the nature of the ultra-dense matter in the cores of neutron stars is unknown. Because neutron stars pack so much mass into such a tiny volume, they produce gravity strong enough to bend the light they emit, distorting their appearance in a way that enables the mass and size of the star to be measured. Scientists cannot reproduce the extreme conditions in and around neutron stars on Earth. They must look into the galaxy to answer decades-old questions about extreme matter and gravity. NASA's Neutron Star Interior Composition Explorer mission, or NISA, will make X-ray observations of neutron stars from its perch on the International Space Station. It will give astronomers more insight into these mysterious objects, helping determine what is under their surface. A multi-purpose mission, NISA includes a technology demonstration called Sextant. It will analyze NISA's observations to validate the use of rapidly rotating neutron stars as navigation beacons for travel in deep space throughout the solar system and beyond.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. We do have the navigational waters continuing to be ice-free, and of note, we've had more melting in the Chukchi Sea, so we do have almost ice-free waters in the Chukchi Sea as of now. Headed down into southeast Alaska on Wednesday in the inside water, southerly winds 10 to 20 knots, strongest further to the north, and the northwesterly winds in the southern areas of the inside waters around 15 knots. Head over eastern portions of the Gulf, northerly winds 20 knots expected. Then as we get further to the north, southwesterly winds 15 knots expected. And then as we get to the very northern portions of the Gulf, northwesterly winds 10 knots. On Thursday in the northern areas of the Gulf, we have west-northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, and then northerly winds 20 knots in the eastern portions of the Gulf. In the inside waters, north to northwesterly winds 10 to 15 knots are expected. For Wednesday for south central Alaska, most areas are seeing a westerly wind in Prince William Sound that's around 10 knots, 10 to 15 knots in the northern portions of the Gulf, and western portions 20 to 25 knots, west of the Barren Islands 25 knots as well, and then in the Cook Inlet area 10 to 15 knots weaker as we get further to the north. On Thursday in Cook Inlet, northerly winds 10 to 15 knots. Around the Barren Islands, northwesterly winds 25 knots. Northwesterly winds for the remainder of the Gulf 15 to 20 knots, and then 15 knots out of a northwesterly direction in Prince William Sound. For Wednesday around the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, on the Pacific side, we're seeing northerly winds 15 to 20 knots, dropping down to around 10 knots out of a northwest to southwest direction for the Bering side, and that's going to see seas around 3 feet. In Shelikof Strait, northwesterly winds 15 knots expected. As we move into Thursday, becoming north to northeasterly for most locations, around 15 knots, and then east of Kodiak Island, northwesterly winds 15 knots are expected. On Wednesday for the Aleutian Islands, starting off with the eastern Aleutian, southeasterly winds 10 knots, becoming more southerly as we move towards the central Aleutian Islands and getting up to 20 to 25 knots, and then southerly winds by the western Aleutians around 30 knots, with seas up to as high as 13 feet by the western Aleutians. On Thursday, out over the western Aleutian Islands, southwesterly winds 15 knots, picking up to 30 knots out of a southerly direction as we near the central Aleutian Islands, seas up to as high as 10 feet there. Out over the central Aleutians, southerly winds 20 to 25 knots expected, and then as we push over towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, northeasterly winds 10 to 15 knots. Along the west coast of the state on Wednesday, starting up in the Norton Sound area, northwesterly winds 20 knots, becoming westerly by St. Lawrence Island, 15 knots there. Then down the rest of the west coast, northwesterly winds 10 knots expected. Southerly winds 10 knots for the Pribilof Islands, and southwesterly winds 15 knots for St. Matthew Island, with seas up to as high as 10 feet. Then for Thursday, along the west coast, as we stay by Nunavik Island, northwesterly winds 10 knots, up to 15 knots and out of a southwesterly direction for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Then by St. Matthew Island, southerly winds at 25 knots, seas once again highest by St. Matthew Island up to as high as 11 feet. Then for the Pribilof Islands, southeasterly winds at 15 knots expected. Along the Arctic coastline, staying out over the Beaufort Sea, easterly winds 15 knots, becoming westerly 20 knots as we get by AKwx and areas further to the west. Then down the west coast, southwesterly winds 15 to 20 knots, becoming northwesterly as we near Kotzebue Sound, 25 knots there, and then through the strait, westerly winds at 15 knots. Looking into Thursday along the west coast, going to see primarily westerly winds, 20 to 25 knots north of the strait, and then through the strait, southwesterly winds 15 knots expected. Along the Arctic coastline, west to southwest winds 20 knots are expected. Recap of weather for tonight. We have a frontal system slowly pushing through the western and Aleutian Islands towards the central Aleutian Islands, bringing rain to the area, but high pressure is dominating much of the central and eastern areas of the Gulf and Aleutians. And then out over mainland Alaska, just to the east of the Kotzebue Sound area, low pressure is bringing rain through much of mainland Alaska, and then a mixture of rain and snow up along the North Slope and through the Brooks Range, where we could see some accumulations of 4 to 6 inches in the higher elevations of the Brooks Range, including some of the passes like Adigan Pass that could result in that slushy snow as we look out for those total accumulations 4 to 6 inches through Thursday. We're also going to have some fog along the Arctic coast and west coast of the state, with some rain down in the south central area, extending down the North Gulf Coast into northern locations of the Panhandle. As we move into Wednesday, continuing to see rain for the northern locations of the Panhandle, much of the North Gulf Coast, and much of mainland Alaska until we get to the west coast, where we'll see primarily fog, and fog up along the Arctic coastline as well, with rain moving into the central Aleutian Islands from our front out west.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.